to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody taking part of the events, raising funds in the security and defense sector in collaboration with NATO and the Royal Academy of Engineering. My name is Kaidi Ruusalep. I'm the founder and CEO of Funderbeam, and I'm the host and moderator of this event. Well, why do we have the events around the security and defense sector? Let me read a couple of words to you. GPS, internet, duct tape, drones, microwave, superglue. These are all innovations that came out from defense and security industry. And it kind of, part of our daily life and daily use. We know it, we like it, we use it. But nevertheless, we very little talk about innovations in the defense and security industry. It can also be named as deep tech, and deep tech that is so much supported by the patient capital. We will today try to talk about this industry that is very little spoken about, discussed, and we will talk about the innovation that is becoming part of our daily life. We will talk about how do we best execute those innovations and how do we help these defense and security companies work with the governments to help them to take the next move. How is it for them to raise the capital? Is it like for any other startups, or is it something different? And how patient does the capital be for this type of investment? And also, I think we will talk about the things we normally don't talk about and the questions we kind of don't ask about. And I am very pleased to share the screen today with so distinguished guests, both on the speaker side and also on the side of startups pitching. So some organizational words and the agenda. So we'll start with the keynote speech, and keynote speech from Lars Frolund from MIT, and soon Lars will present himself and the topic, and Lars will talk about the deep tech and the patient capital. It will be followed by fireside chats, and very happy to share the thoughts together with Rob Murray from NATO, Dr. Shabana Haque from the Royal Academy of Engineering, with Daniel Carew, principal at IQ Capital, and also Alan Grace from DASA. And the pitching, the last hour is the pitching, and pitching will be hosted by our Copenhagen office and Meret, and we'll reach there. Should you have questions, there's a Q&A button. Send the questions, and we will take the questions at the end of the panel. And also, if we have time, the startups will take the questions. I wish you all a pleasant listening, active participation, and I would now very much like to give the floor to Lars. Lars, for you, we say good morning.
Good morning, everybody, but I also think for a lot of you it's probably good afternoon. So thank you so much, Kaidi, for that short introduction to today. I've been very much looking forward to present some ideas, some thoughts, basically, on what I call patient capital for urgent challenges. Just a quick few words about myself. I work at MIT. I work at a place called the MIT Innovation Initiative. So the MIT Innovation Initiative is basically a place where we gather different types of research connected to innovation. It's very broad and term of innovation. So I work there as the research director. We work a lot with governments, we work with companies, we work with other universities on this very broad innovation agenda. So one of the things that I've been looking into for some years now is basically, so very overarchingly, how can we become better at taking early technological developments from the lab towards the market? And also being very much aware that we currently have a risk capital system that's very optimized for market risk, but not very much for technological risk. So some of the things that I want to talk about today, and I chose to basically give myself a question and then try to answer the question. And by answer that question, hopefully, spur some debate that you'll have throughout the day. I'm a Dane. I can say that also. Probably, if you haven't noticed it already through my accent. But I've been living in the US for some years now. So, and I'll take it from there because I only have 15 minutes. So I need, even for an academic, I need to be brief. So Cam, if you can get me to the next slide, please. So this is the question that I've sort of given to us, and I also have given to myself. So let's ask this question. If we were building a fund for deep tech, in parentheses, dual use ventures, in today's innovation economy, how should we organize it? So the way that I would just want to answer this question, hopefully just getting back to really spur some debate for you guys, is to maybe double click, just being like the way that we sort of modernize our language. Let's double click a little bit on what we mean by deep tech, what we mean by today's innovation economy, and then how we organize it. So that's the way I'm sort of trying to sort of go through that question. So let's start with this concept of deep tech. So Cam, if you can take the next slide. So deep tech for me is by the way, I live in a place where you talk about deep tech, tough tech, hard tech. So this means an enormous amount of things, and it's very, very hard to sort of narrow down somewhat conceptually. But I think these are some of the overarching areas of technology that was put forward by this deep tech investment report, put forward by different funds. I think it was actually Schmidt Futures that was behind some of the insights here. And I really urge you to actually read this very, very interesting report. So these are just some of the areas. And I think that some of you might actually be working in these areas. Some might be living in working for organizations where they sort of try to scope down key technologies, emerging technologies that they need to focus on to stay competitive. Also sometimes for national security. These are some of the areas that you need to be in front. You really need to be a front runner in some of these areas. So that's all good, but what are then the sort of the problems with this type of deep tech? If you can go to the next slide. So this is just, just where once again, I'm trying. It's an easy way to break this up. As soon as you get to a level of granularity, I must say the world becomes a little bit more complicated. But in sort of an easy way to talk about the challenges of this type of deep tech or hard tech is that, it has a long time to market. It has often very high production cost. There's a very high sort of production risk, basically. Some of it is basically due because we have to do with emerging technologies, which basically means that some of the key qualities, capabilities of the technology might not even be known yet, right? So sometimes you sort of try to predict the technology, but it's actually only when it gets more and more mature that you actually can see what it can be used for. So that's why you also actually have a high product risk, and sometimes it's even hard to see what the right market fit is, where it sort of fits in. On the other side, you also have high barriers for entry for others. Like if you really are able to bring this deep tech technology to a high level of maturity, you will often have competitors, but there might not be as many of them as in other areas. And you have these high spillover, knowledge spillovers as well. But I think the thing here is that you still have these key challenges about, long time to market, high production cost, high product risk. Next slide, please. So what does that mean then for how we actually fund this? So this is some recent numbers that I took from PitchBook. So it basically just shows that there is an enormous amount of investments that's going into, so basically, there's a lot of IT, there's a lot of healthcare going on. So one can always ask ourselves, does that mean that deep tech is underfinanced? I would say, I actually think that is true. On the other hand, you can always say that that is also because there's nothing good to invest in. So you need to be careful when you say these things, but I think it's pretty clear. And we also have other numbers that says that, at least what we can say is that the current risk capital, the classic venture capital fund, the way it's structured and so forth, is really not optimized for this type of deep tech. That is often also very related to a defense use and sort of becomes possibly a dual use venture. So if I just want to sort of focus on the problem here, the problem is that we have a type of technology that can really possibly solve some of our urgent challenges, but we do not have the right capital. We need a specific type of more patient capital to go into this area to really push forward these types of technologies. And if we do not do that, I think the result can easily be that some others will develop these technologies, which then can actually lead to problems for our national security and etc. Can we take the next slide, please? So this is just one example of an approach, and I'm just, obviously just promoting MIT, my own place, something called The Engine. They've just raised their second fund. This was, I don't want to stay here for a long time, but you can really go into this type of fund, which is really built for deep tech. So making sure that it's not only the money, it's also what we call smart money. So you get, for example, a lot of access to laboratories, etc. What we do know is one of the key problems with when you have a high technological risk in the first sort of years after leaving for example, a university, is that you suddenly do not any longer have access to advanced laboratories. So I think that is something that the Engine has been able to very successfully provide. Next slide, please. So this was just as an example that this actually happens. So the question was then, okay, there was this thing about deep tech. Let's then dig into this question about the innovation economy. So some of the things that was also, part of the question that I asked. One of the key things that we're seeing right now, and let's see, by the way, after COVID, how this looks like. I think this is pretty interesting. But I think what we've seen is an enormous high concentration in very key global locations around the world, the United States, Europe, Asia, and obviously beyond. We can call them, innovation ecosystems. I live in one of them around Kendall Square, which is very much like in the heart of MIT, where we just have an enormous amount of conglomeration of talent and some of the largest companies in the world that just want to be there, but often for something very specific. In my area where I live, is very much biotech and pharma. So in the world, so in that sense, we can say that the innovation economy was supposed to be flat. It's not because of globalization. That's actually not true. The world has become incredibly spiky. That's actually what we're seeing. Next slide, please. So this is just another slide, sort of showing the same point, that even when you focus in on a specific state, you can see that you have an enormous amount of agglomeration actually happening. Next slide, please. These are some of this is a slide about sort of the different types of stakeholders that you need to engage if you want to build a fund that is connected to these different innovation ecosystems. There is a specific role to play for obviously the entrepreneurs, for the risk capital, but what you sometimes forget is basically also the connection to universities. That's one of the key sort of partnerships that we always have difficulties in actually both building and managing. And there's obviously some of the larger corporations finding out how they can actually participate in this. There is a tendency to look at some of our large corporations as a key competitor. Sometimes they can also be a key collaborator. I think for most companies that work in tough tech areas, at some point, you would probably ask yourself the question, would working with a large corporation actually be something that would be beneficial for me, or should I rather use a strategy of more competition than collaboration? Next slide, please. So let me just start by, sort of framing the question again. If we were building a fund for deep tech dual use ventures in today's innovation economy, how should we organize it? So now we've been going through sort of, what is deep tech? How's the innovation economy structured? So how could, for example, a possible answer actually look like? Next slide, please. So these are some of the guiding principles that I would say we should be guided by if we were to build something like a fund today. It should be mission driven, targeted some of these challenges. It should focus on nascent S-curves of these specific technologies, making sure that we actually have an emerging technology, but at the same time, we're also seeing it has the maturity, and obviously the maturity so that we can see some of the capacities of the technology so that we're actually able to predict some of the market use. And I would suggest that it should be embedded in these innovation ecosystems around the world. So basically mission-driven, specific R&D focus, and sort of the system perspective on it. Some other things that I would like to focus on. So let's say, go through some of those bullet points. A fund for deep tech ventures in today's innovation economy should, yes, solve the systemic problem of early stage funding for deep tech. So that means, at least for me, making sure that we might have a connection to some of the classic venture capital, but we also need to make sure that we have other institutional investors there that can provide that same type of capital. We might partner with what we call dual use friendly VCs to facilitate this crowding in effect. So when we get closer to the market, that we've actually made it interesting for them to actually be part of the venture that we're starting. So in that sense, it's very much about getting early in, but we also need to have a very clear exit strategy, basically on how we want to bring our capital back so that the classic risk capital can go in. I think it would be very, very interesting also to create, like, say, an accelerator program, because the problem is that for a lot of universities around the world, for example, there is simply not enough people that sort of are interested in these things. So we need to obviously make sure that we create a pipeline. If we do not have a pipeline, we actually do not have enough to invest in. We need to be sure that we have a critical mass of good ideas. And we need to be very sure that the accelerator program that we're running is a jungle, not a zoo. So I'm very much for that we, instead of putting through people or companies through a 1 year or 2 year accelerator program, why not 6 months and make sure that they really fast prove whether or not they can actually survive or not. And I would then situate the accelerator in some selected innovation ecosystems very close to specific universities, and maybe focusing these accelerators on specific technologies that is very fit for these areas. And speaking about the defense, I think some of the things that we could also imagine is using NATO or other organizations as an initial market. So in that sense, we actually create a system where we can sort of cover it from idea to impact. We cover it basically from things that we sort of develop, for example, in a lab. We bring it to you sort of have a sort of capital through the accelerator that can sort of take the technological risk, but also some of the market risk. But we also need to be very careful that they don't die afterwards. So we also need a system that takes care of what we call these beachhead markets or initial markets, which I think some organizations as NATO or others can actually be useful to see in that perspective. Next slide, please. Thank you. That was it. I hope I was within the 15 minutes. That was a little bit of a speed talk, but hopefully this was value. Thank you.
You were very much. Thank you, Lars, for taking part of the event, and you've given us very good guidelines to take over and discuss in the panel. So thank you, Lars.
Thank you.
And what you said is that the engine, the deep tech fund in MIT, and the keywords are to bridge the gap between the discovery and commercialization. And when we think about the speakers who next will discuss over the fireside chat, then we have the very early discovery phase. Also, we can, I think, Alan, you can represent the discovery phase. Shabana is about the implementation and execution into the real world. Daniel is about the capital, and it all goes into the NATO as the initial market, and Rob to present it. So welcome, panelists. And Shabana, would like the introduction with you, going to Anna, Daniel, and then Rob. Maybe leave it you the last to do the introduction of yourself, and also open the perspective from NATO.
Okay, so thank you. It's really great to be here. So I'm Shabana Hack. I'm Head of Engineering Policy at the Royal Academy of Engineering. A large chunk of my background or experience really spans from working in government, particularly in security and defence. Very early on in my career, actually, it was around actually working with police, working with the military to develop specific pieces of technology for deployment on explosives and drugs detection, for example, and also working in the Department for Transport on sort of aviation security solutions. So really thinking about how you kind of take those ideas, you develop them, you co-develop them, and you implement them in a real world scenario. So happy to discuss and share ideas shortly.
Thank you. Over to Alan.
Thanks, Shabana. Yeah, so I work for Defence and Security Accelerator, DASA as everybody seems to call it, which is a UK government funded accelerator to de-risk technology. We fund a lot of technology developments, and we pay for people to do that. Where I'm involved is bringing in that other part, which Lars was talking about, which is trying to find the VCs and the other funds that we can bring in behind them. And Funderbeam's secondary market is really interesting. So I'm coming from a slightly different perspective, but yeah, we fund stuff very early on to make them into being something that's much more usable.
Excellent. And you prepared the companies for Daniel and IQ.
We do.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Daniel Carew. I'm a principal at IQ Capital. I have a background as an engineer and a PhD. IQ, I guess, is one of the foremost deep tech investors in Europe. And we actually invested in many of the things that Lars presented on the deep tech slides. So I think we can claim to be a deep tech fund, and we do everything from pre-seed through to Series A.
Perfect. And Rob, we are here because of NATO.
Oh, wow. Okay, you put the pressure on. But well, a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. My name's Rob Murray. I'm the head of the innovation team at NATO headquarters in Brussels. And I've been in defense and security and national security for almost 20 years now, starting off as a British Army officer and transitioning more on the political side, working here in Brussels for the last 7 or 8 years. What we really in NATO are trying to do is trying to create an environment where innovation can truly flourish. And that sounds very lofty and very sort of altruistic, and I recognize that. But to build on those points that Lars was describing there, that pipeline of universities that are able to bring in deep technology, very early research that requires significant patient capital, and also that comes with high levels of risk, bordering on uncertainty, and to be able to develop those alongside not only small startups and very small companies, but also venture capital funds and investors, and in a national security setting, operators as well, and be able to actually try to bring these things through and help in their commercialization and operationalization. And I think Lars's point about dual use is absolutely critical to this, because the way I view it is these new technologies, and it doesn't matter which ones we're looking at, but fundamentally, we need to be thinking about them in not total addressable markets, but total addressable problems. And what I see from that is the point that if you're only addressing a problem that is in a national security or a defense environment, then actually that is not big enough in order for that technology to subsequently grow. You know, the way in which these markets work now, and I'm sure we'll hear about this later on, is that we need much more competition and civil utility of such technologies, because that's where the innovation is going to be driven from. And the military and defense can benefit from that. So dual use, focusing on total addressable problems, is key. Now, the point I wanted to raise and delve a little bit more into is this notion attached to capital, and specifically the idea of trusted capital. And for some of you, you'll be familiar with that phrase. For others, it will be new. But fundamentally, what it means is if you're a startup and you're doing a seed round, a Series A round, whatever, you need to know where that money's coming from. And it's not just a case of, well, it's coming from, my good friend Daniel at IQ Capital, but literally, who are the LP, who are the limited partners, who really has provided the cash? Because what we're seeing in the arena of national security in many nations, in many of the 30 countries which are members of NATO, is that when a company gets to a level of maturity and they want to export their goods and services, most allies have some sort of financial screening mechanism. I think the one which most of us are familiar with will be CFIUS, the US Committee on Foreign Investment in the US. And fundamentally what that means is there is a need for your products, your goods and services to be given a green light by whichever nation you happen to be in to subsequently export it. Now, during that process, there is a significant level of due diligence done on you as a company, as a startup. And that goes to looking at where the money's come from in quite some detail. And what we are seeing is many startups, through no fault of their own necessarily, having to unwind their cap tables because around, some investment that was taken in an earlier round, maybe 18 months ago, 24 months ago, had links to adversarial states, and as such, that's just not gonna fly for the government. So these startups are dying, and they just don't have the cash flow and the time to be able to deal with that. So what's my point? My point is, if you are a startup, you need to know where your money's coming from. And you need to have what could be quite an awkward conversation with potential VCs, bearing in mind you're wanting to get funded, about asking, who are the LPs? Where are the cash flows coming from? And if you're a venture capital fund, you need to be comfortable with giving up that information, because what we are going to see, I can be fairly confident of this, in the next, certainly next year, and it will probably roll into 2022, I suspect as well, is many countries start to put into legislation significant financial screening processes with regards to national security. So this is coming. It's coming down the track. What we want to be able to do in NATO is to try to provide a bit of a standardization, sort of advice to nations as to, okay, here's kind of the best practice with regards to financial screening and trusted capital. And here's how you might want to think about it, because not every NATO nation has the domestic ability to provide this sort of due diligence, if you like. What I want to avoid as we go about this process is, or what I want to avoid is creating too much bureaucracy. I want to avoid trying to distort markets, and I want to avoid transaction costs as much as possible. So it's not my intention, as we develop these standards in NATO, to try to make more red tape and bureaucracy. Although I'm conscious I'm a bloke sat in Brussels wearing a grey suit, so that may not sound too accurate, but that's very much the intention. The couple final points, and I'll stop talking and let the others jump in, is going back to Lars's presentation. He presented that map of the sort of 20 ecosystems of startup communities, ecosystems across the globe. That has a fairly high degree of concentration, particularly in North America, which is understandable. Through this approach, what we want to be able to try and do is actually try to smooth that curve a little bit. Try to have greater opportunities for startups across the NATO alliance, so it's not quite so highly concentrated. Why? Well, first of all, it just decreases risk. in terms of where things are being produced and where money's flowing. But secondly, I would argue that there's probably some good arbitrage opportunities there. I would suggest that if you're a West Coast US VC fund and you're looking at national security or defense and aerospace, it's probable that your thesis does not necessarily include startups that are perhaps in Central and Eastern Europe, for argument's sake, within the NATO alliance. And yet the valuation of these sorts of companies relative to perhaps, US ones, for argument's sake, I would argue is probably lower. And yet there is some amazing talent, some amazing engineering skills, and some amazing capabilities that are there. So I think from NATO being able to try to use the platform that we have as an alliance to highlight this issue, I think actually for investors, there's some good opportunity there. And likewise, for startups as well, by sort of engaging in this activity of understanding where your capital is coming from, then you're far less likely to have the sort of unfortunate activities that have occurred to many startups where they've fallen foul of national financial screening. So there's a lot there, but I would just like to say a huge thank you to Kaidi for putting today's session on, and for Funderbeam, because I think platforms like Funderbeam are absolutely part of the solution to this idea of creating an environment where trusted capital exists, where we understand where it's coming from, and such that investment can occur in a safe environment, if you like, within the realms of national security.
Thank you very much, Rob, for the nice intro and also putting Funderbeam on the light. But taking your stories, what you're saying is that the defense and security startups, they need to think more carefully and tailor their journey as an entrepreneurs, as an enterprises from the very early beginning. And I would actually give now the a chance for Daniel to come in as a capital. Is it different when you look at the defense and security, and maybe Alan, you will follow, is you as an accelerator, how do you pick the companies? And do you look only for very novel and new technologies, and as a question here, or also you look somebody who is amending the existing technologies? But Daniel, from the capital point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Rob raised some really interesting points, particularly, I think he was mentioning around the exit. I think from my experience, I've spoken to the CTOs of a few big defense companies, and the message at the time was like, look, you guys have got some great technologies in Europe, but I can't get it out, right? Because it's contaminated in some way. Like, I'm not even going to bother working with you because it's just too difficult and I can't see what the end game is. So some of the risks that Rob was raising, I've actually seen come in completely upfront, to the point where funds that I was working at, they didn't even want to invest in the fund because they were thinking that was too much of a risk, and they just didn't believe that European technology could be taken out of whichever country it is, right? Whether it was the Great Britain or anywhere across Europe. So it's like a real and present thing. I think when Funderbeam mentioned this event, I mean, I got really quite excited about it, because I think there is this opportunity here to kind of fill this vacuum, I suppose you would say, that we don't really have a DARPA, right? Europe doesn't have a DARPA. It doesn't set money aside and go and fund these groundbreaking technologies and produce what you see in the US, which are many small, really high tech fund or companies which go and supply into defense, and they quite often supply into the civilian market as well. And some of those really break through and become really big companies, right? Because they had this early sort of stakeholder and customer in defense. And I think what we're hearing from Rob at NATO and sort of others across Europe is like, there is this big need. We do see this big need, and it sounds like from the ecosystem that Lars very helpfully laid out, right, where there's a government and there's corporate involvement. It does really feel like that is now happening around defense. So, and I think a lot of the technologies which do go into defense are quite often super high tech, right? They are the the hardest of technologies. You know, they do have lots of development risk, and the thing that gets, you know, any investor excited is some sort of customer involvement, some sort of customer need, and I think really if NATO, you know, is going to provide that, that would really help, you know, investors put money in, and I think for Funderbeam, you know, if there are a lot of these companies who are sort of aggregating around this platform that Funderbeam, you know, is bringing all these parts together, that's really an ecosystem, and that will hopefully help. That will help everyone, right? And quite often, I think that'll be like an ideal angel investment. And I'm here because I'm hoping some of those are going to break out and become like awesome venture investments.
Thanks, and very good intro to Alan. Alan, how do you pick startups? How do you pick the startups into your accelerator so that it could end up in IQ portfolio? And then we will, with the help of Shabana, also talk about, is the capital the only problem? Or how do we take the technologies and actually introduce it in the real life?
Sure. The accelerator has a comprehensive, it's open plan. If you go on to OpenGov, you can find DASA, and we advertise our open and themed calls. And I think it's really important to realize that we fund technology. We don't actually fund companies. So we fund the technology and we de-risk the way that the technology is brought forward. So that means that we take proposals from universities, even from research groups within large organizations. If they can't find a way to fund it, then if it's got relevance to defense and security and they can convince us of that, and also we have DSTL scientists behind us looking at the validity of that, then we will fund it and we'll find a way to fund that. So we select them on that basis. Now, the whole area around the investment they've had before is new and fairly interesting, and probably the most relevant proof of that is the National Security and Investment Bill that went through in UK Parliament yesterday. So, you know, that's come forward, and that's saying not only are we going to start looking at nefarious investment, but we're also going to look at whether people are buying IP out of these companies and whether we're going to. So that acts a really important change in the way things are going. So I think that's to be applauded, and we've got that will knock its way down. But to your question about, yeah, we fund things, we fund them based upon, is there a customer need for them? Do we have the customers within? When I talk about customers, I'm talking about MOD or security customers who believe that would help them do their mission. And secondly, is there some chance that we could help take that from being perhaps either a concept, a bench concept, into something that could turn into a product, which would then become the sort of thing an angel could get involved in and would drive towards Daniel's type of investment further down the line. And that's really where I come into play, because I'm bringing that knowledge and understanding of that sector. So to the question, no, we don't just fund novel research projects. We fund a spectrum of things. And if you've got something playing to the dual use thing, which you think would be perfect in this particular sector, but you're not sure how, come and talk to us, because we have open calls and themed calls which enable us to do that.
You've been running this accelerator for quite some time. What are the challenges of the companies and startups in your accelerator and the defense and security industry?
I think quite some time. You know, it's been going for 3.5 years, so that's, you know,
that is quite some time.
I know. But yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that we will fund them to get them to a certain stage of technology. But the minute we get them in, then I have to start talking to them about how we're going to turn this into a product. How are we going to find a way to get it procured, bought from these government departments? How do we turn it into a conversation where you can actually find the right person who has the bills to be able to buy it? Because we can fund the development, but we're not giving you a procurement of the actual service itself. That comes further down the line. And I've done some work with the wider MOD about creating, unfortunately under the spending review that's just been suspended, some vehicles to do that. So an MOD as a first customer fund, a defence innovation loans vehicle, and some early stage technology funding. So there are things we're trying to do to be more imaginative about this, and hopefully they will move people from, I've got a great technology, I've turned it into something that we've proven that it works. Now, how do we get it to a point where somebody would want to procure it? And how would they go for it? So it is the constant challenge, Alan.
Excellent. Shabana, taking the technologies into the real life. What are your stories? What are your thoughts about it? And taking what Alan said.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. So, you know, one of the biggest challenges I think that you face when you're a sort of government customer um, is actually, you know, being able to translate your requirements in such a way that it doesn't compromise security or sensitive information, and is yet sort of granular enough for, you know, companies or research and innovation to be able to kind of try to meet those requirements. And that can be really hard, actually. And I think there's also, you know, there's a little bit about being able to sort of change a culture, which I think, you know, can, you know, it's naturally cautious, and, you know, finding a way or encouraging those at the sort of the customer interface to be more confident, or to find new ways of being able to kind of convey their needs, their user needs, to enable technology to be developed. It can be a real challenge. I mean, it sounds sort of like, you know, relatively straightforward, but I mean, it really isn't. And I think there can be often a case of sometimes it falls in the too difficult box, and therefore it's not necessarily pursued. And it's definitely getting better. It's got, you know, it's got miles better, but that it can be like the first step or the first blocker is in that translation.
Can I just add?
I think.
Sorry, I was going to say, Shabana, can I just add something on that? Because I think we spend a lot of time on trying to problem custodian with people. So we work with not only the MOD and other defense and security, but we work with, as you mentioned, Future Aviation Security and DFT and a lot of the other programs. And a lot of that is how do we articulate the problem is really important. So we spend a lot of time on that. But it's hard for us to articulate, but it's also hard for the SMEs to articulate what they can give us. And there's a challenge that we have to sit on that line at some point.
Shabana, you also said when we discussed, when we prepared for the panel, is that it's so comfortable for the government to go on with the usual suspects, right? You know, you've always had the same partners. And how do you get into your network the new technology providers, the new startups? How can they build the trust to be the partner for the government?
Yeah, I think that is, you know, that is an ongoing challenge. I do see that, and I don't, and this isn't just in sort of the technology provision side of this. This kind of goes wider to provision of advice, technical advice, and you go to people that you're comfortable with working with, or you've worked before, always worked well. So therefore, you know, they're your kind of your go-to people, if you like. I do more that can be done around sort of creating communities, you know, more trusted communities, to have these kinds of conversations, you know, and this platform is one way of, you know, Funderbeam is one way of being able to do that. I think, you know, anything that can enable or support these kinds of conversations and discussions is really, you know, really kind of, you know, to be applauded. But also it's more also maybe something to support both sides to be, you know, to do that. There's something about, you know, I think, you know, government being confident to do a bit of that horizon scanning and to spot those new technologies, and looking outside, you know, as you know, like a lot of the technologies that kind of get implemented in defence and security, they haven't originated in necessarily in that space. They've originated in another sector and they've been picked up elsewhere. So, you know, things like, you know, perhaps having champions to support specific technologies or to bring them to people's attention are some ideas that exist. But I think at the root of this is some way to promote greater openness and transparency. And that's so hard in an area where it is absolutely right to be cautious. But I don't think that should be the default setting.
I wonder sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
I think you hit on all those points, Shabana. Like, I think it's events like this where people get to know each other and they realize that is normal. And I think, you know, supporting the entrepreneurs. I mean, we've got some awesome entrepreneurs pitching later, and the really successful ones are the ones who have those networks, right? And they quite often had them from somewhere else. But it's only through events like this that you can go out and meet, you know, someone from NATO, someone who's worked in government, and develop that. And then, that communication works both ways, and then that becomes the new normal.
Yeah, and Rob, I understand the trusted capital is not only for the capital, but it is also for the network, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just to pick up on some of the threads that are coming through here, I mean, Shobana's absolutely right. This idea of cautious culture, which permeates across, quite frankly, all governments, certainly in NATO. It's a public sector thing, and I find it quite ironic that pretty much all governments have, to some degree, elements of defence overspends on major acquisition projects. So think, aircrafts, think ships, tanks, these massive programs. The vast majority have quite significant delays and cost overspends attached to them. And yet the idea of throwing, I don't know, $1 million, couple of million, something which is quite small in relative to such overspends at some new novel technologies and trying them seems impossible. So there is a significant cultural problem that we need to try to overcome. And I think that this idea of bringing in a way in which unsolicited technologies and perspectives where they can be tried to try and solve problems is critical to this. The notion that customers understand what they want and are thus able to write a rather tedious requirements list, and that will solve the problems is actually laughable. And I say that as a former army officer, where that's how it's done in every Ministry of Defence, and it is just not reality. So we need to overcome those elements as well. And also there's a whole incentives are misaligned when it comes to government and this sort of thing. Quite frankly, to Shobana's point, that there's no incentive for, if you're working in a Ministry of Defence and you're only there for a couple of years and you move on to another job, there's no incentive to change. You're there basically to make sure that you don't screw up, you get your annual reports, and you move on to your next job. And so there is no incentive to take risk in new technologies. And that is not just a UK thing, that happens across, like I say, many ministries of defence. So the culture and the people, and educating the people in events like this, as Daniel says, is critical. My final point, and I'll be quiet, is this idea of IP protection. So if you're a startup, again, coming back to investments, if you have anything to do which supports a national security agenda in terms of your use case, then understanding the ownership rights around IP is going to become much more important than perhaps it has been historically. So again, you need to understand this stuff. And the final point about creating an environment where innovative technologies can come through a pipeline, be tried with militaries and security agencies and so on and so forth. We need to be able to have rapid contracts, and I think Lars touched on this in his opening point, such that these startups can start to generate revenue. We cannot continue to give startups, just from a government perspective, grants, because that is not the way in which the competition and the innovation and the development is really going to go. So we on the government side, if the government is part of the customer base, we have to have a way where we can generate very quick contracts that can be signed in a matter of weeks, gusting months at most, to help start revenue generation in companies, because that is where we will see who will survive and who won't. So I'll pause there, but cultural change is at the heart of this.
Good, you touched very good points, and I would like to address the first part of the question to Alan. Is the customer of your startups government, or is it the private sector? And the second part to Shobana is that how much do you, for example, work with the accelerators of the defense and security industry? How far actually you go in this chain, and how early you work in this chain?
Okay, so two things I'd say there. One is the people who give us the money to fund the contracts that we award are public sector currently. We are working with private companies, some of the tier ones and some of the primes, to work out whether they would be a better route for some of the innovations that we have funded to become procurable for government departments, for various parts of it. I think that at early stages, we've just created a program around that, defence industry partnerships, and we've just launched a cluster down in the southwest to really develop how we can do that. But I think that, you know, if you're asking me who our customer is, in our jargon, the customer is the one who gives us the money, who pays for the service. That's government departments, and that's a wide range of them. The other thing that I just come back to Rob on is we have themed calls, as we call them, but we also have open ones. So we have the open one where somebody can come in and say, we've got this technology, we think it's great, we think there is somebody in the military, somebody in defence, somebody in security who might want this. And then we have another team which goes out and tries to understand whether that's true, and if they are, then we can bring them forward. So we try to open the door as wide as possible. And a lot of those actually quite often are existing technologies which are being repurposed or re-engineered. So we can help them to do that, and that goes forward. But from the point of view of the customer, ultimately the person who is going to be paying for this, you would hope, is the government. And we're just trying to expose them. And Rob, a lot of what we do is, you know, we talk about exploitation, as you well know, which is horrible jargon. I hate it. I came from a different world where we talk about commercializing. But one of the valid outcomes of this is that we've informed somebody about a decision they've made to not follow that technology, or to work up a particular better understanding of what they should be asking for and the questions they should be asking. So we get various different agendas, and that can be frustrating for you as a business. I can understand that, because you're not going to get that sale that you wanted at the end of it. But actually, from the point of view of future business, it's a really important part of what we do and work with.
And Shabana, your collaboration with very early companies, and where do you start working with the companies and technologies?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, in terms of the academy, in terms of the Royal Academy of Engineering, so we have an enterprise hub that is, you know, working in the space of supporting entrepreneurs financially, and providing mentoring support and access to industry contacts and that kind of thing. I think in terms of linking it with DASA, not as yet, but I know me and Alan have afterwards intend to definitely pick up a conversation on this, because I think the academy and the networks that it has access to, in terms of, about 50% of our fellowship is from industry. And so there's something about being able to just, provide support, or, even in terms of, reviewing the types of technologies or bids that come on board. Maybe there's a space there to provide, external expertise or input into that. So there's a lot more that I think we could do, and I think this is the start of the conversation, really. So I think it's really exciting. I did want to just say a point specifically on the trusted capital piece, because, and actually I think this relates to sort of cultural and behavioural change as well, because I think there's something around, actually, if you can kind of improve security mindedness at a very early stage in people's careers, at research stage perhaps, when individuals go to university and start studying, you already can start to kind of, introduce these ideas and concepts to them along, at the beginning of the pipeline. So, it's much more comfortable, accessible, easy to understand. And so it doesn't come as such a shock that you're asking all these questions at sort of a later stage when you happen to, become an entrepreneur or have a startup. It's sort of it's embedded in your learning. And I throw that as a suggestion, but that's something that I know that, Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure in the UK are quite keen on promoting, is the idea of trusted research, and some of the principles around that, I think, are things that could be applied much more widely.
Yeah, I also understand from the discussion today and all the participants here, these are the early steps of building the network. I mean, network between all the necessary parties, and this party and this industry specifically has a strong government present, but also now that we know it needs the early boost on the innovation and more transparency. Daniel and IQ Capital, how do you pick the companies, and also you are part of this network, this defense and security and deep tech startup network. From the capital point of view, what is it that can be done and should be done?
Well, I think for us, we invest in deep tech, so we invest in things where there's been a true breakthrough in terms of technology, which can be applied to multiple markets, and quite often that's often defense, right? There's defense is quite often a lead in terms of application and knowing what the problems are, right? You look at IoT, you look at sensors across supply chains. I mean, that's a big and common issue, which DARPA and others are looking at sensor networks in the field and so on, right? So that is quite often a leading indicator for me in terms of which technology is going to eventually make it into mainstream. And I think the nature of sort of the global thing and competition, Shabana was just highlighting sort of secrecy from a national perspective, but industrial espionage is a big thing, right? Not just from that. So I think for us, when we look at startups, it's where we can see that really a real innovation in terms of technology, markets where they can go into, and this is why being part of this event is great, because quite often the things we invest in have an overlap with that. So we're really interested in hearing from those people who have that early stage technology, and that they can see this path to market. And we have expertise in going in and helping reduce some of that risk. And hopefully we can help with that story that will then, bring other capital in down the road.
That's an interesting question, Cayman. I think because you already speak, I'm gonna ask it for you. The other question for DASA. But Daniel, not all national security and defense problems have technology fixes. So how do you promote novel ways of doing business or novel applications of existing technologies from the investor and capital point of view, and also picking companies in the portfolio and when they are already in the portfolio? So how do you help them?
How do we help them sort of outside of the defense area or whatnot? I mean, well, quite often we get involved because we understand the technology. Everyone, an IQ is an engineer or some sort of tech background. So we quite often understand the technology at a deep level, and then understand the markets that it can go into, and then help look at that roadmap, look at the applications. But it very much is the storytelling that Alan was mentioning and Shabana hit on, in terms of explaining to others who have capital, who aren't so close to the technology, why this is going to be a big thing. And in terms of, we can't really change the business environment that much, except every now and then something like this comes up where it really feels like the ecosystem could move on, and there's a whole bunch of stakeholders which are coming together, which could really make a difference. And that means it's suddenly possible that a whole new class of companies are going to be able to be piloted by entrepreneurs, whereas previously it would have been just too difficult. So that's a big deal.
Yeah. I wonder if we can just jump on to Daniel's point there, because I think he raises a very good one with regards to that question. And the person that's asked that question is absolutely right. Not every national security and defense challenge has a technological answer, and likewise, not every challenge is the responsibility of governments and states to provide answers. And so I would also offer a view that if you are a startup or a technology company, whatever size, quite frankly, and you're working in, you're based within a NATO country, then you should have it within yourself as a principle that you should not undertake activities that may put at risk national security. And that these sorts of principles and norms, nobody's going to enforce those sorts of things. They're not going to be legislated, I suspect. But as a company, it's about behaving responsibly in an ethical way, and therefore having that embedded in the way in which you as a company do business, I think will help to mitigate some of the national security and defense challenges which arise. So it's not, I think it's a two-way street. On the government side, there has to be a degree of legislation, but making sure that it is as minimal and as unintrusive as possible. But equally on the company side, just don't do things which may put at risk national security.
Very good, because it's time to wrap up the panel, and you kind of took the last question away, or already you responded to it. I was about to ask if you would give one advice to the companies attending the event today in the defense and security, or at least going into the defense and security, what would it be? Is there anything to add what you've already said, Rob? So if they go away and there's one advice from you, and then all the panelists.
Well, from my perspective, understand to a fairly high degree of detail who is in your cap table, where your money is coming from, not just the venture capital funds, but who the LPs are and the source of that money. It will make life an awful lot easier downstream.
Thanks. Daniel, one advice.
Yeah, I would say network. Find experienced entrepreneurs who have done built successful companies in this area, and find out how they did it, and get to know that. And we've got some experienced people on this call who people can go to who have done it before, and know what they're doing. And the right advice from one of them will save you a lot of headaches.
Perfect. Alan, what is it you tell to your startups on the demo day?
I would say make sure that you're as strong a business as you are as a commercial entity as you are as a technical entity. Make sure that you build the commercial side of your business to be as strong as possible, because that's what makes you procurable. So get yourself on frameworks. Make sure that you understand the standards you've got to work to. Make sure that you've got the right quality people within the team. Those things are really important, because somebody somewhere is going to make a procurement decision if you really want to take it forward. The question that we haven't got time for, I will respond to that as a typed response to that person. So I'm sorry about that.
I was about to ask that. Why don't you type? It's a good panel, we think along. And Shabana, final words to you.
Yeah, I'd back up what Daniel said. Is you use this opportunity and other opportunities to make networks and contacts, and really learning from the experiences, including like the pitfalls, as well as the successes, to really help take this forward, and just having a think about that translation piece that I mentioned, and how, if there's a way to kind of build a bridge between the user needs and the technology, and how that might be improved or amplified. But connections, networks, really important.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Shabana. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Alan, for taking part of the event. It's not the last one. I think it's the beginning of many of the series in this field. Thank you for the advice. And like so many of you said, that learn from the people in the network, learn from the players. And I'm happy to present the pitching session of defense and security startups, the 5 good companies that already are in the network. Listen and learn from them, and thank you for the panelists. Thank you. And I'm giving the floor to Copenhagen and to Merete, who is running the pitching session.
Thank you, Kaidi, and thank you so much, all panelists. It was so interesting to hear from all of you from different perspectives, and for also giving some cues to the pitching companies now, what they should keep in mind. So as Kaidi mentioned, this is the last part of today's event. So we will hear from 5 super exciting companies. We have 4 from the UK and then 1 from Norway as well. Every company, all of the pitches will come in one, but we have, as you know, we have the Q&A box on the bottom corner here. So you can just type your questions there. After all of the 5 companies have pitched, we will start with the Q&A session, which will be moderated by me. So please fire away with your questions during the pitchings as well. I would now, without any further ado, I would like to invite the first company to pitch, which is Eralis. So Eralis brings one aircraft system with many missions. So Nick, the online floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Moretti, and thank you very much, Katie, as well. It was a very interesting session to start with. Can I have the first slide, please? Yeah, I'd like to thank Funderbeam and NATO and the Royal Academy of Engineering for inviting us to present at this seminar. It's been very interesting so far. As Marita said, our tagline for Eralis is one aircraft system, many missions. We're addressing a 180 billion euro addressable market. We think we can deliver 30+% cost savings, and we are the future of Air Force fleets around the world. We're doing this with a unique patented investment opportunity as for a major disruption for military aviation. Next slide, please. So what's the problem we're solving? Well, today in air forces around the world, they operate many small fleets of different aircraft, and I've listed some of them up there. And we actually were attending a presentation by the head of capability for the Royal Air Force, and he admitted to us that they have 48 different airframes in use, including both rotary and fixed wing, and the maintenance problems. He said 85–90% of those, they have less than 10 aircraft. So, you know, the cost to buy them is expensive, the maintenance costs are high, and reliability is poor, at a time when there's shrinking budgets, increasing the unaffordable options in the military area. So what's the solution? Eralis have patented what we call a modular aircraft design system. So I've talked about the problem on the left. On the right here, this is what we call the common core fuselage, the center of our aircraft, which then you can fit different wings, different engines through an engine module, which we have patented the technology to make it like a Formula One engine that becomes a stress member in the chassis. And this can perform multiple functions. And the advantages of this has been well proven in the civil aviation area, where you in the 90s, Airbus introduced the A320, and then you could stretch it a bit to make the A321, put longer wings on it, etc., to solve numerous different things, different uses. But the training system was common to all, and the spare parts pool and maintenance was all similar. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, our solution is a modular aircraft design, which can handle many roles. The company's been going for over 4 years, and in 2016, we filed for patents on the engine design, also the modular engine design and the modular capabilities. And we're in the final stages. We're in what's known as the preliminary final approval for both European and US patents, which we expect to be granted early to mid next year. As I said here already, you know, this is the common core fuselage is about 80% of the aircraft, but we have multiple wings and multiple modules to serve very many different markets. We believe we can meet the need of about 40% of an Air Force's requirements. And I forgot to add that when this Air Marshal at the RAF was speaking, he said their objective in the next 10 years, by 2030, is to get from 48 down to 10 airframe platforms that they're using. We've had a number of external organizations check all our costing models, and we are convinced that, or they're convinced that we can deliver well in excess of 30% cost savings over existing systems. Because it's all built on a common system and a common architecture, we have an unrivaled data and information system available, which gives amazing data for pilot training and the other roles. Today, there is no direct effective competition out there for us, so we see ourselves in a unique spot. I'm sure people will start to compete with us when they see what we're doing. And all this creates a new, unique market opportunity. Next slide, please. So we talk about the market here, and we're aiming to disrupt a market which over the next 20, 25 years is a 180 billion euro market for new military jets. And again, all these figures on the left here, the 6,500, we've got market surveys that have been done by government organizations and external organizations, which can quantify the size of the market here for the number of different roles down here. And we're looking over the next, we'll have our aircraft in flight by 2025. And just the training market alone, we see as being worth our sort of, our target market for that is about 293 aircraft, about 5.5 billion euros, and an upside of at least that. Again, we're bidding on one contract at the moment in the US for 200 aircraft. So, and one of the things we're finding is that because of the global military, the global pressures at the moment, a lot of the militaries are accelerating their procurement and coming out much faster. And then significantly bigger markets later on. And just by comparison, the Hawk, which went into production in 1974, so it's nearly 50 years old now, sold over 1,000, and that just did the advanced jet. It doesn't meet any of the other requirements that we did, but BAE stopped production of that in 2019. Next slide, please.
You have 10 seconds to wrap up.
God, I've got very, very quickly. Okay, we're looking for €500,000. Last slide, please. And I've said about the market, we've got 48 people. We've just yesterday got an agreement from the RAF, which we can share under a comprehensive data room that we have under NDA. So we're looking to raise $500,000. The timeline is short because we're in discussions with a couple of sovereign wealth funds and others about major investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you for sharing the amazing stuff your company is doing. I bet we have some time in the Q&A session where we can go a bit more deeper into your fundraising round.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the second pitching company, as I already mentioned, is from Norway, almost my home turf. And so we have Answer here today, who offers mission critical visual communication with only 99% bandwidth, with all up to 99% bandwidth savings. So over to you, Harald.
Thank you very much, Merete. Hello, everyone. My name is Harald. I'm the founder and the CEO of Answer Technologies. Answer is taking its name from the Viking rune that literally means answer. Next slide, please. A critical resource for digital communications is bandwidth. When I started the company, I wanted to find the best answer to this fundamental communication challenge. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with a quote from Helen Keller. She was blind, but said, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." My vision is to change the way we communicate critical visual content, providing clear sight even via communication networks that otherwise might leave you blind. Next slide, please. Since the first smartphones and the first video on YouTube was launched, the sensor resolution has increased by more than 200 times. Bandwidth simply doesn't keep up. And we might be facing the biggest jump in bandwidth yet with quantum dot sensor technologies that promises 1,000,000 times higher density on visual sensors. Next, please. The bandwidth challenges are recognized everywhere. Just look at these quotes from Cisco, Scientific American, New York Times. Bandwidth is a finite resource, throttling the internet performance, and that crummy connections are the biggest tech headache in the pandemic. Next, please. Now consider critical situations. A UAV pilot told me once that too little bandwidth can kill. He was struggling to get his geotagged photo and search observations from his drone to the rescue team located another place in the field. In that situation, minutes matter. Imagine if someone you love were at risk. Next slide, please. Our solution to this problem is software that lets users focus limited bandwidth on the specific part of the observations that is most relevant. Normally, we compress photographs when we transfer them, and when we need details, they're blurry, like the top right. But imagine you could point to any part of the image, like CSI Enhance, and make that portion clear. By focusing the bandwidth on content that has effect, we can save 99% of the bandwidth. The cherries are therefore because we're cherry picking the content that's required. Next slide, please. Feel free to scan these QR codes with your smartphone if you'd like. We have developed software applications that first transfer this preview image to a server, which you can access through a web browser. And here we can draw regions of interest and request that part of the image being fetched in original quality from the source. That image contains geolocations, voice captions if you wish. Both overview images and details can easily be shared with response teams like you may do if you scan these QR codes. What about video? Well, 1 minute of high definition video is 1,000 times larger than the storyboard that we have sent at the bottom left corner. From this storyboard, the receive side can request the part of the video that's required in the resolution and the quality needed. Next slide, please. In tactical video streaming, the key focus is on getting the best possible quality with the lowest possible bitrate. In the video C, we're streaming high definition full HD with only 10% of what we're using now with Zoom or WebEx or Teams. There is still the possibility to select the region of interest like we see here on the video and get 4K precision across the specific part of the video that you like to see. This video is specifically useful and developed for drones and satellite communications. Next slide, please. Our applications are certified by Airbus. We won the Nordic App Challenge, and they're running on the critical smartphone devices. The US Marines, after an exercise in the north of Norway, posted on LinkedIn, pretty amazing technology from Answer Technologies. And we're invited to further collaborate with the US military. United Nations is using our solutions to save lives in the biggest disasters. Next, please. Our beachhead market is drones, UAVs needing satellite communications and being used for critical tactical use cases like surveillance, disaster response. Here bandwidth is very limited, but the image quality is very important for detection probability. This is a market we estimate at $250 million annually within a few years. Next, please. But there are many more opportunities. Each of these sectors can develop into significant tens of billions US dollar markets. Next, please. We have a great team. Just this week strengthened with Paul Guidonis, MBA and ex-president of Inmarsat. Myself, I have a very relevant PhD and decades of experience. Others that we have financial, technical, entrepreneurial skills on board. The total team is 12 employees in Oslo and Barcelona. Next, please. We have traction and momentum with a large range of prominent companies like Cobham, Airbus, Marlink, In Situ, and you see a number of companies here. Next, please. We are looking for investments and partners to grow commercially. Technology is ready. We're looking for about €1.5 million. Please get in touch if you'd like to join us and help us change the way we communicate critical images. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Harald, for this, and congrats on your new team member who joined this week.
Thank you.
Hope it will it will lead to many good opportunities there.
It will, for sure. Thank you very much.
Super. So now we're going to move to the UK again, and we're going to go to our third company called Blue Abyss. So Blue Abyss is building a series of facilities which will become the world's foremost commercial aquatic and space research, test, and training centers. I'm not here to talk about it today, but we have John. John, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. So yes, Blue Abyss is not a technology in of itself, but we're building a set of centres with associated facilities that will enable unparalleled opportunities for collaboration and demonstration, effectively supporting humanity and its associated technology as we progress into ever-increasing extreme environments, both in our oceans and in space. We want to see Blue Abyss act as genuine innovation hubs for the sectors that they support. Thanks, Matt. So why? There are effectively two gaps. In the subsea technology area, after proof of concept, before you get to the real world verification, there is this validation gap. Obviously, if you could close that gap, then you could deploy solutions more quickly, more safely, more cost effectively, time and time again, and collaboratively. And on the other end of our spectrum, there is this, we've been focused as a species, obviously, in terms of going into space, and you've heard that NASA want to return humans to the moon by 2024. We've predominantly been focused on the launch capability and everything post-launch. But there is no focus commercially or government-wise to support the increasing number of humans and their associated technology that will also travel into space. So that gap needs to be addressed and closed, and we feel that Blue Abyss can address both. So how do we do it? Well, a series of centres, as Marietta's indicated, globally. The first in the southwest in the UK, built and centred around large pools. So a pool in the UK that's 50 metres long, 40 metres wide, and with a maximum depth of 50 metres. About 43,000 cubic metres of water. Put that in perspective, an Olympic pool is 3,500 cubic metres. So the pool is split into different levels, and obviously, as you can see here, there's a particular end, which we call the deep end, which is a 16-metre diameter shaft that goes all the way down to 50 metres. But this multiple level approach enables us to have discrete areas where we can enable customers to have their own specific part of the pool, or the whole facility is open for either one client or to collaborate. Blue Abyss has always been a multi-domain focused endeavour, from space to surface and subsea technology. It's about supporting those industries and enabling that communication and collaboration, which has hitherto perhaps not been as progressive as it may have been. This is just another perspective on the building. You can see down to where the lighter end of the picture would be the deep shaft. We've taken the smaller crane out just to highlight the fact that there's also a second crane, much bigger beam crane that can put objects wherever they're required, wherever you need them, to whatever depth across the whole surface of the pool. Those objects could be small submersibles, autonomous or remotely operated vehicles, specialist defence equipment, or offshore energy equipment, of course. Part of the benefit of creating a facility with 43,000 cubic metres of water is we need to filter that water. We can change between saline and chlorinated water, but in filtering about an Olympic pool's worth of water every hour, we can induce currents at different depths, at different directions, and different strengths. Coupled with high definition cameras both above the surface of the water and below, we can monitor the whole environment constantly and enable a variety of real world scenarios to be created to enable as maximum sort of progressive training and development as possible before the real world scenarios take over and you deploy. All of the facility is monitored by our own central control room, mission control room, but there are also discrete mission control rooms that are available to customer use. So if a defence customer has a specific requirement, then we can set up a mission control room specifically for them, and similarly for our space client, all of which of course will benefit from the latest technology communications externally. We've talked broadly about the spread of our markets. Of course, it's maritime defence, offshore energy, ocean economy and space, not just human, but robotic and technology, and of course satellite. But that spread of markets means that we've got quite an awful lot of opportunity to choose from. But in highlighting where the opportunities for Blue Abyss reside, it was more relevant to sort of focus down on two particular areas. So the global offshore autonomous and remotely operated vehicle market has already shown significant growth and continues to do so, and is projected to grow at over 18% per annum for the foreseeable future. And of course, as humans continue to exploit our oceans, we expect that remote operated and autonomous vehicle market to continue to grow likewise. Similarly, at the other end of the spectrum, if you like, of course, it doesn't have to just go into space. There are space experiences. But with NASA returning humans to the moon and an increased availability of government and commercial participants, it's likely that we are going to see more and more people and the associated technology travel into space in the forthcoming years. Of course, there are already alternatives in the subsea technology arena, defence and human spaceflight, but all of these facilities share a similar sort of set of constraints. Either they're very targeted or they have limited accessibility. Just, sorry, Marietta, could you go back up one, please? There was another bit, thank you. I obviously didn't show, sorry. So the constraints really are the fact that these facilities tend to be very focused in their solution. They either cater for one particular market and not another, or they are typically very small in size and limited in terms of who can gain accessibility. But obviously, behind all of this business is a set of people. Here's just a subset of the senior management team and our advisory board, and some of the background of the companies that we've been able to take people from. So the likes of IBM, all the way through to the European Space Agency, Royal Navy, current astronauts like Major Tim Peake, and former astronauts like Scott Parazinski. Our technology solutions in terms of mixed, augmented and virtual reality delivered by pioneers, world-leading pioneers like Professor Bob Stone, and our business development activities overseen by the likes of Barbara Ganelli from Harwell. We are engaged with the US Infrastructure Fund for all of the money post-construction, but our current focus is on our planning round and corporate ramp-up, which is about £5 million, and we are engaged with the UK government to secure UK guarantee status, which would support our main construction funder. If you would like to take part and support us in this unique endeavour, either for a specific requirement that you think that we've not targeted enough, or in the wider expanse of humanity going further into our oceans and into space, we welcome you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much for your presentation. And what a great team you have there. Something that we hopefully can discuss a bit more when it comes to the Q&A. Now for the first pitching company is Oxford Dynamics. The company is still quite in early stages and when it comes to its team and technology, so that's why it's extremely exciting now to hear more from Mike and about what Oxford Dynamics is working on. Over to you.
Great, thank you, and good evening, everybody. I suspect we're the youngest company here, really just a few months old in reality. So, hi, my name is Mike Lawton. I'm co-founder and director at Oxford Dynamics, and we are in the business of protecting assets on orbit. So exactly what that is and why we think this is a great business opportunity and how we're going to make our investors richer, I'll cover over the subsequent slides. But first, let me introduce the team to you. So my background actually is always been in high-end R&D environments, and I guess you could call a serial entrepreneur. My most successful business to date is one I founded just over 7 years ago called Oxford Space Systems, now one of the highest valued space tech startups in the UK. And I can confirm that IQ Capital do invest in deep tech at a very early stage because Daniel and the team are one of the first investors in OSS. But I stood down as CEO at the back end of last year, and that's allowed me to concentrate on building the next one, which is Oxford Dynamics. So my background is electrical and electronic engineering. I've been responsible for numerous patents, and in 2018, I was very surprised to be named as Barclays Bank's Tech Entrepreneur of the Year in the UK. I'm joined in OD by fellow co-founders and ex-colleagues from Oxford Space Systems, Shefali Sharma, who holds a master's in aerospace engineering from Cranfield University and enjoys great support from the Royal Academy of Engineering. In fact, she's part of their promising SME leader program. So I can confirm the Royal Academy is a great supporter of startups as well. Technical heavyweight expertise comes from Dr. Debbie Fellows, who's a recognized antenna and electromagnetic expert, actually within the defense community, not just in the UK, but also across Europe and in the US. 20 plus years experience, holds high-level security clearance, and has worked on a whole range of really interesting technologies, none of which I can actually tell you about on this call. But the idea of OD is to build a portfolio of interesting and high-value intellectual property to defend assets, that's satellites on orbit. We've got great traction already. We have support from Innovate UK, as well as a profitable contract from the MOD, UK MOD, to explore one of our ideas. Next slide, please. So what is the opportunity? Well, we used to think that if we flew really high, that we would be beyond the reach of an enemy. And now we even thought space was beyond the reach of an enemy, but that is not true. And this is now starting to come into the public domain. And you can see the quote here from the chief of the RAF. Space is now the next contested domain. And this has trickled down into some of the mainstream press, covered in The Independent a couple of months ago. And we therefore believe there's an opportunity to develop a range of scalable and configurable technologies that can be applied to protect essentially what are sitting ducks on orbit, high-value satellite technology. The slide should have animated, Meret, so perhaps you could press advance. Great. So the idea is to develop these range of scalable technologies that can be applied to a satellite bus structure according to the particular mission. And crucially, as Rob touched on earlier, this isn't just about satisfying military requirements. These are configurable and applicable to commercial satellites. And we have a very interesting conversation underway with a satellite prime. Next slide, please. So before you can defend your satellite, it starts with detecting and understanding what a threat looks like. Can you press advance? This slide isn't actually animating as I was hoping. So what I'll skip ahead to talk about, because I'm sure you're all watching the animation now. Once you've detected the threat, you then need to enter a mode of defending the satellite. And what you're seeing animated here is a concept that we call the crown of thorns. And this is based on inflatable technology. So you can imagine if a satellite wanted to dock in a nefarious manner with our asset, then we need to prevent that docking. So a simple way to do that is with a structure that would prevent the satellite getting close. You may think this is stuff of science fiction, but we've had 2 dockings on orbits in the last 12 months, and a satellite engaged with a satellite that was never designed to be docked with to prove that this could be achieved. Where things get quite interesting from a defense viewpoint is the development of novel surfaces treatments to go on this type of structure. We can make the structure virtually invisible to both radar and optical systems. So you can imagine that can be used in a very interesting way to confuse an enemy satellite wanting to carry out various nefarious activities. And in fact, we can make the satellite look like it's in a slightly different position to the one it physically is. Next slide, please. So in summary, we're developing a range of very interesting technologies. We're actually cash flow positive, and that's achieved via consultancy grants and contracts. Advance, please. But we are receptive to exploring equity investment, and that would help us accelerate the technology and expand the team and achieve those very all-important in-orbit demonstrations, which really drives the valuation in a startup business. So we reckon kind of a seed round from 250K upwards would probably be worth a conversation around. And ultimately, why are we doing this? We think the technologies we're developing will make a very interesting acquisition for one of the large incumbent defense contractors, the Boeings, the Raytheons of the world. And that typically will be a journey of 5 to 7 years, we think, to generate real value in the business. Next slide. So thank you for your interest and look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And what an exciting company you have with protecting space assets. That was at least something that I hadn't thought about before I started talking with you. So super, super interesting to see that. We have now come to the last pitching company of today. So I would like to welcome Simon, who will talk about what better options hot data can give us. Simon, over to you.
Great. Good afternoon. My name is Simon Tucker, VP of Business Development for Satellite View. And we are going to launch the first infrared satellite constellation to monitor building activity, to monitor building efficiency improvements, to monitor activity-based intelligence, and provide better decisions. We're working with our technical partners, Surrey Satellite Technology, the University of Oxford, and the European Space Agency to launch our first satellite in 18 months' time. We're currently raising our seed round of £1 million to scale up commercial service, develop IP-enhanced applications, and provide match funding for some large grants. Next slide, please. So existing Earth observation data of optical and SAR show you the outline of a structure. We're different. We'll open up the box and give you indications of activity inside, day and night. And this is important as the defence in the UK is one of the largest consumers of energy. The US DoD is one of the largest consumers of energy on the planet. And buildings play a large part in that. If we're ever going to get to net zero, this has to be addressed. We can monitor the heat emissions from buildings anywhere on the globe, can target improvements, track progress on those, provide comparisons and reporting. We can monitor, we can monitor key infrastructure sites all around the globe and give activity-based assessments. Are the bad guys at home? Have the vehicles outside moved recently? Our ambition is to provide defense with a sustainable and safer for the warfighter with our infrared insights. Next slide, please. So our solution is to launch the first mid-infrared satellite constellation. Our design's been driven by our customers, so we're looking for 3-meter building level resolution. We've got infrared video, global coverage, and we'll be targeting 10 to 20 revisits per day. Our design is a combination of new advances with heritage tech to give a low risk, low cost, but high performance system. And we can make money from just one satellite. Each satellite will cost about £10 million, and there'll be 7 in the full constellation. Next slide, please. So the infrared market's new and not very well understood, so we commissioned our own market survey from Euroconsult, which put the potential marketplace at over 2 billion in 2027. Large and rich sectors were identified, and we'll be targeting defence and energy first, and we'll be first to market. This is obviously a big marketplace with some huge verticals, so how are we going to address that? So next slide. So we put together a world-class team. Anthony, our CEO's last role was starting up a regional satellite operator in the Middle East, Ishelsat. When he joined, there was an empty office. When he left, there was 80 people, 2 satellites in orbit, and a valuation over $1 billion. Toby, our CTO, is our technology expert who turns pixels to information, such companies as Airbus and the Met Police. And 12 months ago, I was running an energy trading department, and when I understood the data set the satellite view was looking to unlock, I quit my role and joined up. I understand the market and many of our first customers. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing over the last year? We've been engaging with our potential customers. We've got over 130 major leads. We're targeting customers that would sign up to large subscriptions. We've got 24 letters of intent, and the pipeline's got a value of over 55 million a year. And we're now moving the discussion on to paid aircraft trials. Next slide, please. So we've built the pipeline. There's an engineering sample of the camera been built. So over the course of the winter, we're looking to do 6 aircraft trials and provide sample data sets to customers to give them the confidence to sign up to pre-launch contracts. We're also kicking off development of our software delivery platform and developing those IP enhanced applications. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, we're closing our seed round, hopefully in the next week or 2. We've got a world-class experienced team. We're looking to unlock equity-free grants, build revenue from our test flights with sample data sets. We're 100 million revenue potential, and we're currently raising £1 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you all for your pitching session, for your pitching. It has been very interesting to hear from all of you, and we're not done yet, but now we will go to the question answer of today. So all of you attendees, please feel free to write any of the questions while I start with asking some. And the first question here today will go to Nick from Iralis. So how much money do you need to get to production?
To get to production, we need about 200 million. But there's a long way to go before we get there. We are in negotiations now for a 3rd round funding of about 60 or 50 million euros. I can say $60 million. And that's the one we're looking at the moment for a bridge funding to get to just keep us going until that deal is closed. And we've closed 1.5 million, well over 1.5 million euros now in funding from high net worth individuals, and we're looking for another 500,000 now.
Great, thanks. Next question goes to Oxford Dynamics and Mike. So we're having a question here. Is your business model B2B or B2G?
It's B2B. Our primary customers will be the satellite primes building hardware on behalf of other customers, be they defense and security customers or commercial entities.
Great, thank you. Moving on then to Blue Abyss. So how scalable is your business?
So we've already identified, besides the UK sites, and we've got engagement in Houston, in Abu Dhabi in the Middle East, the UAE, and in Japan. We see that all of those locations share similar sort of market profiles, i.e. offshore energy, typically historically oil and gas, but increasingly renewables, all the way through to human spaceflight. And all of those identified locations share that similar market profile. Obviously, locations like America perhaps would support more than one facility. And of course, at the moment, there are certain locations that are perhaps a slightly more delicate approach than they might be in a few years' time.
Great. So then we go to Answer here. Can you talk a bit more about your pipeline and a bit who is buying your product?
So we have sold this to disaster response, emergency response, search and rescue, to police. And we are currently selling a pilot project for testing the solutions and flying it. We have flown it with drones, UAVs, with a relatively new satellite terminal, which is only 1.5 kilo. That takes you into an interesting segment with tactical drones, less than 100 kilo, maybe more than 25, which is the segment that we're targeting. So our pipeline there is basically, I've been speaking of several of these UAV events like AUVSI, Exponential, etc. So we're targeting everyone that's in this sector. We have NDAs with In Situ. We have discussions with DJI, by the way, as well, so smaller drones. We have a process going with UN Peacekeeping, who are looking to stream video for peacekeeping missions, which is nice. It's both military and humanitarian. And we have projects with European Space Agency. We have a project in Thailand that we're looking to close in a few weeks, which is about 6 drones. The total value of our pipeline is in the order of 4 million euros, and it's a weighted pipeline in HubSpot. So we weight the early opportunities less than the later ones, obviously.
Great, thanks, Harald. The next question then goes to Simon here. You mentioned that you are looking for 1 million funding. How are you going to use that money?
So yeah, it's split between scaling up commercial service. It's split between supporting some of the our flight tests and working on the analytics, and then a large part of it actually supports match funding for some of the large grants that we should be winning.
Great, thanks. We have a question here for Eralis. So here, the modular parts require the modular parts require maintenance? And then does it? How is that cost efficient compared to the conventional planes?
Well, what it means is that the common fuselage, all the avionics and control systems are common across all the aircraft types. So that is a huge saving. So the only things that are different are the wings and sometimes the engines. Some applications will need higher performance engines, some of the lower performance engines. We've even catered for that by being able to handle twin engines or single engines, so that you could have the same engine type with different power available for different applications. For example, a basic trainer needs a single engine, an advanced trainer needs a twin engine.
Great, thanks. The next question is for Blue Abyss. So how much money does it take to build a single training complex?
The complete facility is about 100 million pounds, dollars, euros, whichever currency you're available in. And then there are some additional features and facets. The UK is slightly different than the prescribed facilities for the UAE and for the US, in it has associated accommodation and links to parabolic flight capability and a long arm centrifuge. It's roughly 100 million per facility.
And what is the timeline for building, for the first building?
So construction, we intend to go through planning within the next 6 months, and it's an 18-month build. The site we've identified has got a 28-day planning application. So from submission of planning, it's 28 days later to start. and then it's 18-month construction. Obviously, if we can reduce that planning application period, time between now and submitting planning, then we can speed that up slightly, not considerably.
So you're busy with getting all of that going.
Just a bit.
Yes. I have a question here for all of you. We're here to talk about basically the challenges or to be in the defense and space sector and security. Can you talk a bit about what you have found the toughest as a company to be in this sector? And let's start with Mike from Oxford Dynamics.
I think I'm going to start with what I found most surprising from the Oxford Space Systems journey. I've noticed, certainly in the last few years of being at OSS, the actual appetite for risk on behalf of the MOD. Our engagement, we've been very successful with DASA and other parts of the MOD, and the pace at which they wanted us to develop technology and the level of risk they were willing to embrace because they really wanted technology demonstrated on orbit sooner rather than later. So I was really surprised at just how entrepreneurial they were in their approach. So breaking away from the very linear way that we normally develop technology for orbit, going from a very well-defined prototype, moving up the TRL level, qualification models. Literally the conversation turned from demonstrate a prototype to us, and then can you replicate that as an elegant breadboard, and we'll fly that. But can we have it on orbit in 16 to 18 months? So that's been the real surprise for me. But the challenge, I think, of working predominantly on defense contracts, as Rob Murray highlighted earlier, you can't rely on the MOD to be a great customer. I think it might have been Rob that said earlier in a previous conference, look, MOD is the worst customer in the world. We take forever to make decisions. We never want to spend any money, and then we're going to change our mind at the last minute. So you need to find other customers. So the mantra at Oxford Space Systems is, yes, it's great to be able to sell the technology and have interest from the defense customer. It's great to credentialize the business and drive the valuation, but the real money will be made elsewhere in the commercial sector. So I think you've got to have that mindset all the time. Yeah, great to work with the MOD, but my God, you need to make your money elsewhere.
Great. Harald, what are your thoughts here?
Similar, slow decision making, not necessarily asking for things they don't know exist. So it's hard to promote innovation, new solutions. And I guess also coming from a small country, the government business is even smaller, obviously, than in a bigger country. So there are challenges we took part of TechStars recently. There are some funding opportunities called SIBR that are available for American companies, but not for European companies. I think DASA funding actually is available for Norwegian companies. But definitely the slowness decision making and the not asking for solutions that are innovative, I think, are the two key things.
Thanks. Simon, what are your thoughts here?
So, yeah, I think the slow is, we've seen that. I think one of the problems that we've come across is we think we have a good solution which might address many of the problems from the defense intelligence community, but they can't tell you what those problems are very well. They can't articulate them very well for obvious reasons. And so finding examples which are in the public domain, which would be as similar, I think that we've struggled at times to actually find analogous examples. Yeah, and so for us, I think that probably means potentially that we need to partner with a specialist security analytics company, potentially those sort of things who have the security clearances and have those much deeper engagements than we do at the moment. That may help us with the routes in potentially.
Nick, what have been your biggest challenges?
Well, I would just go back, as Mike did, to say what have been the good news. We've had a tremendous number of people enthused by our project, and we've got a team of, say, 46 people today who are all experts in their area and some of the best people available who all are attracted to the project of wanting to have Britain. It's been over 40 years since a new aircraft was built and designed and built completely and so they want to be part of the project. So we've got a tremendous team. That's been very good. The challenges we've had, the same thing is slow. We tried to engage with the RAF 4 years ago. We had somebody in there who was a blocker. Fortunately, about a year ago, he was moved out of that post, and since then they've been very receptive. And as I said, we're just about to, we've got a letter yesterday to say that they've approved the business case and budget for a major agreement with us, and we hopefully be able to announce that next month. So that's it. And also raising funds in this market. My background is in the IT sector, and I also oversee, there's a huge IT element. The IS at the end of Oralis stands for Information Systems, and there's a lot of that in there. And I've invested myself in probably about 15, 20 early stage IT companies. About half a dozen of those have been very good investments, and some of the rest have not been. But overall, I've come out well ahead. But in the defence sector, it's a very, very cautious market. People in the market have never heard of investing. Companies don't tend to take small investments in early stage companies, which they tend to do a lot in the IT sector. So raising money has been extremely hard.
Last but not least, John.
Thank you, Martha. Lovely to be introduced like that. So I think we've had a slightly different challenge. We're in the location we've picked in the UK. We've got good engagement with the MOD, specialist units, and more broadly across the sort of different services, branches of services, we've got different levels of positive engagement. I think the biggest hurdle really has been the scale of what we're doing. Typically, so if you go to American outlook in terms of government outlook has for a number of years been to engage with commercial entities, but commercial entities to take on the role of delivering equipment, personnel, facilities. Whereas in the UK, perhaps more like in Europe, it's normally a top-down approach. Governments design facilities, and then eventually they may be cascaded out to become private businesses. Here we are from the get-go, effectively going the completely opposite way, from the bottom up. And so there's a degree of UK cynicism around that. Obviously, there's a pandemic to cope with. The UK has been going through its own series of turmoils pre-pandemic anyway. So all of those things have made it a relatively challenging environment. So persistence has been key. But slowly but inexorably, I think our business model, the fact we're taking nothing away from the UK taxpayer and just become a net contributor, that's gaining traction. I met with the Prime Minister recently. He was really taken with both the business as itself and in terms of that business model that we've got private backing. We're only looking for the UK Treasury to support rather than actually invest. That's been taken positively.
Great. So yeah, some of you already talked about the financing, that has been challenging, but also probably getting grants and that's part of starting your company. But it was interesting, Mike, to hear that you're already cash flow positive and you're still such an early company, a new company. If you would get investors on board, who would that be? Who would you want to have on your cap table?
It's a great question. Space is not a fast game. You've got to be patient to see a return. And I fondly remind people that SpaceX is approaching 20 years old. It takes a long time to build a decent company. That's worth value in the space sector, and therefore it's patient capital and those that understand the technology. Especially developing space technology, it's not just about bolting materials together. Quite often, it's actually about developing the material that you actually then want to turn into a product. So you can build a great portfolio of intellectual property at a material level, as well at the technological, at the system level. So an investor that really understands deep tech is absolutely critical. So that's the sort of investor that I would be looking for. And of course, working with an investor, it's tougher than a marriage. You can get divorced quite easily, but getting rid of an investor or getting out of a relationship is a lot tougher. So you've got to find an investor that you kind of share the same view of the world and that you get on really well with, because it's absolutely critical. You only live once. You've got to enjoy who you work with.
Great answer. That's also why Funderbeam really believes in bringing liquidity to both the the investors, but also to the fundraising companies in case there comes some problems or other opportunities in there.
And I think, can I just say quick word on strategy? You know, the reason we're pursuing the route we are doing is it's about building value and credibility in the company, approaching the investment community on day zero. You know, there's no quicker way to lose your equity because you really don't have much to show for it, and it literally is a wild punt. So if we can show that the ideas that we have actually are of genuine interest to our target market, and much more importantly, show that we're securing contracts to explore these early stages, then we're increasing that credibility and therefore the valuation. And then at some point, it then makes sense to have those conversations with the investment community. But I was very lucky with OSS. I literally secured investment from having the idea to the first $500,000 actually of seed investment in the bank was less than 8 weeks. So that was kind of a really kind of turbocharged way of starting a space business. So this time round, I don't quite need to move quite so quickly with the investment community. But if that conversation happens and it's the right meeting of minds, then yeah, there's a deal to be done.
Great. So we only have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to start and wrap up here. So one last question for all of you. What is the minimum ticket size you would accept from an investor? And are you planning to raise possibly on Funderbeam? Let's start with.
Sorry, who did you say?
Well, Nick, you can go first.
Our minimum investment size is 5,000, and yes, we'll certainly look at it.
Great. John?
We're probably looking right away with 250 and above, 250,000 and above. And yes, we are, as you know.
Simon?
So our minimum ticket size is about 100K, and yeah, for future rounds, we'd definitely be considering Funderbeam.
Super. Harald?
First, we are definitely looking to raise on Funderbeam for sure. The minimum ticket sizes in Funderbeam, I wouldn't comment, but you know, separately outside as individual investors, we wouldn't have too small ones. So a few 100,000 K probably.
And then Mike.
Yeah, I guess minimum ticket size, 100K is worth starting a conversation. And yeah, certainly, yeah, looking to raise on Funderbeam.
Great. So I just want to wrap. I muted myself there. I want to thank all of the fundraising or for the pitching companies for presenting here to us today. It was super exciting to hear from all of you, very different companies, and always good to also hear that you're out here and looking for investments. So for all of you listening here, we will be sharing the presentations after this event. So if you want to ask any more questions from these amazing startups, you will have their contact details through there. And on that note, I would like to thank you all for being here today. And I would like to give the word to Kaidi.
Right. Thank you. Thank you all very much. And listening to the startups, especially those 5 startups pitching, there's a saying, the sky is the limit, right? So to all entrepreneurs who set the goal as high as the sky, believe me, it's too low, because sky is the limit is a bit too low goal. So thank you for all of you actually setting us a very different example, very different perspective, and the courage you all take of going into the space and even further. But listening to the speakers today and the panelists and also the startups, so some takeaways. It's crucial of the defense and security sector actually to check the capital, not only where the capital is coming from, but how patient the capital is, because it's a long journey. It's going to be up and down. It depends on the partnership as well, and it takes time, not only till the execution and going to the market, but also to being a profitable company. build your network, and network is important. And also what I heard from the panelists, it's not only for the companies to build their network, but it's also for the institutions like NATO and accelerators like DASA, and then the Royal Academy of Engineering and Funderbeam also being part of this, to build the network so that the entrepreneurs would have more smooth entrepreneurship journey in this industry. Focus on revenue if possible, and find who your customers are. It's the trust and transparency in this industry, and very much like what Mike said, is that it is crucial to build the credibility and engage investors and community early, because it is very often, especially when we talk about the space, right? As we said, the sky is the limit, right? And somebody wants to go to the space, then the questions will follow. We are very happy with Funderbeam and also helping the entrepreneurs, helping the community, working with DASA, working with Royal Academy of Engineering, and also working with NATO and IQ Capital to be there, help the networking, help the trust, help with the capital, and to help those companies to be connected. Thank you, Lars. Thank you, Rob, Shabana, Daniel, Alan. Thank you, Anchor, Arealis, Cluabus, Oxford Dynamics, and Satellite View. Thank you all for taking part of these events. And as promised in the beginning, it's the first of the many to come. Thank you very much, and entrepreneurs, really thank you for setting the new limit or expanding the vision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.